Welcome to the ECE Classroom podcast with your host, Susie Beghin, inspiring early childhood educators every day. Welcome to the ECE Classroom, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of early childhood education, parenting tips, and creative learning strategies. I'm your host, Susie Beghin, and today we have two special guests joining us, Kate Woodward-Young and Carrie Casey, who have their own podcast called Childcare Conversations. I'm so happy to have you both here today. You bring such incredible insights into this field, and I know my listeners are eager to learn from you. So before we jump into today's topic, tell me a little bit about yourselves. What drew you to early childhood education and what inspires you most to continue working in this field?
I think age before beauty, Kate. So.
Well, sometimes we just, when you got both of them, that just means I get to go twice.
Nope.
So, Susie, to answer your question, I'm going to say I had kids. Honestly, I started as a home-based program 32 years ago and absolutely fell in love with being able to be with my children and be there as kind of a support line or a support piece for others who wanted to do the same thing. So I didn't last very long as a registered family home, mostly because I became really passionate about helping other owners, managers, people who have the inspiration to get started and helping them run their business like a business. So it's kind of where I landed.
That's amazing.
And I decided when I was in early childhood education as a consumer that I was going to have a school when I grew up.
Okay, Carrie, are you really a consumer when you're 3? I'm just saying.
I was consuming all of the care. I was consuming a lot of care, and I was one of the, nobody knew what time I'd be dropped off, but they knew I'd be the last kid picked up at the end of the day. So I consumed a lot of care.
So you definitely made use of it.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I was 3 or 4 years old when I decided when I grew up, I would have a center or at the time a school, because I went to a day school is what it was called. Then, from the time I was 12 or 14, saved all of my money, worked 2 and 3 jobs so that I could open my own school. And I did that. And eventually had 4 schools. And, when I sold those, I worked for a school district for a while. And I've been training and supporting administrators in early childhood since the late 90s. So I love doing that. That's kind of my passion at this point in my life, is supporting the administrators of childcare programs, because if you don't have an administrator who feels supported and has a broad knowledge base, then they ruin it for everybody else. You can't have fun in a school where the leader is running around like a chicken with their head cut off. So
Absolutely. Amen. I agree with that 100%. So you're doing some very important work. That's amazing. And I can't believe you have memories from 3 years old. I don't think I have any memories from that age.
Yeah,
I can't remember that far back.
Yeah, I know I have memories from at least 3 because of when my parents moved into the house that I grew up in, because I have several memories from before that, one of which involved my brother not being a very supportive older brother.
Okay, so today's topic, we're going to be talking about parent and community engagement. And so my audience is mainly early childhood educators. There may be some administrators out there too, supervisors and childcare owners. So tell me a little bit about how educators can move from simply informing parents about their day, about children's day, to truly partnering with them to really get them involved in the child's learning journey.
Ooh, can I start?
No.
Yes.
No, you can't. I'm starting because it starts with curiosity. You've got to be curious about where the parents come from.
Well, I was actually going to say it starts with making sure that you're only talking about the child's day.
Yeah.
Well, but it's important if you want to have a real partnership with people to know what they value and where they come from. So if you have, say, a family that's Bengali, it is helpful to know that in traditional Bengali households in Bangladesh, that the grandparents do most of the hands-on caregiving, not the parents. And knowing that when a family from Bangladesh comes into your program helps you to have real informed conversations, because they may have picked your program because the people in that classroom are in their 40s and they felt comfortable with that being the caregiver for their kids. And then you have another co-teacher come in who's 19, and then you're like, why is this parent getting all antsy? Well, it's because a 19-year-old can't be a grandma. And so that makes them feel uncomfortable because they don't feel like the 19-year-old is ready. And that's just a cultural expectation. It's not necessarily reality, but it's their expectation. So knowing some of that background really helps with having a good collaborative relationship.
I mean, I think I think that concept kind of crosses all nationalities, all faiths, all ages of families, all demographics of families. Because if you've got families with multiple families, basically you've got, a divorced family, or maybe a family that never actually got married, and you've got those grandparents, right? So that family, that could have like 3, 4, 5 people that are involved in the care for those children. And so I think Carrie brings up a really great point that you have to know where they come from. My real starting point would be to also, as the educator, remember ultimately that it's all about the child, but it doesn't mean that you do it. It means that you figure out what is the best way for it to happen for that child. Because I know that I've seen teachers who get so impassioned and really truly fall in love with the kids in their program, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But then they're doing things that they wouldn't or shouldn't be normally doing. And we have some that tell us stories about literally braiding the hair of every child in their classroom. And I'm like, so we've got 12 little toddlers waiting to get their hair braided by one of the caregivers. And so it's like, although that might have been a great one-off kind of thing, we have to remember that it's really important as educators to figure out that line between yes. Educator, family, friend, what is our role?
That's interesting, because that reminds me of something I was just talking about with one of my administrators yesterday. And it was an incident we had with a teacher where she was kissing and hugging one of the children. And the parent complained about it and said, I'm not comfortable with the teacher giving kisses to my child. And so again, it's a matter of knowing what's acceptable amount of affection. How can you show affection to children in different ways, and what's acceptable to certain parents or not acceptable. So that's a really important point, and getting to know the parents and what their expectations are would really help, in that scenario, right?
I mean, curiosity, I think, is the cornerstone of being a good educator. If you're curious about what the kids are interested in, then you bring that into the classroom. If you're curious about where the parents come from, what their values are, then you can bring them into your program more effectively, more authentically. If you're curious about what can we do together, what can you bring into the classroom, then you have more of that symbiosis. And you can take it as a personal affront when somebody says, I'm not comfortable with you kissing my child, and be like, well, so you don't want me to care for your child? No, they have a structure that, kissing is for these 5 people in your life, or whatever it is. And anybody outside of that, you have to have been vetted for a really long time. and that's true in every culture. Like there's pockets of that, right? And helping that educator not feel personally attacked because their values about how to show affection and the parents don't match doesn't mean that either one is right or wrong. It just means that they're different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's, really interesting about this kind of conversation and that curiosity component is the curiosity also has to match your program, right? So, whether it's your educational philosophy or what type of curriculum you use or what is the guidance principle within your program. So all of that needs to be part of pulling folks in, which hopefully folks who are listening, when new families come into your program, you're involved in, I don't want to say selecting the families, but kind of. So when folks come on tours or they're introduced to your program, hopefully you've met them a little bit. So you at least get some sort of gut response or gut feel. I think the other thing that I know that I've seen Carrie do with programs, which is a great tip. So if you're an administrator listening, being part of the edification of the teachers in front of the parents. So when that new family comes, introducing them to the teachers and to the educators with why they're really great in this classroom and what they bring to that age group, so that the teacher isn't having to try to figure out how to toot their own horn and basically say, I know stuff and I'm really, really good. And I think that sometimes as administrators, we get so overwhelmed with the paperwork or those kinds of details that we kind of forget hostess duties and introducing our guests to each other. And so, and we're building a pretty long, well, hopefully a long time relationship with this family. And so we want to make sure that we start it with a positive experience. So
I love that. Yeah.
As an educator, if your administrator isn't doing that, finding a time during a tour to walk over and shake the parents' hands and say, hi, I am Carrie. And if you have any questions about toddler behavior, I'm here to answer them. And then go back into your classroom.
The other thing you could do is, make sure that they have this episode and you can share this episode with your administrator.
No, I absolutely agree with both of you. I think it really starts right from the first contact, right? The first impression with that family, with the child, when they come in for the first tour of your center, and how you interact with them and how you are introducing them to the educators that are going to be the people who are replacing them, basically, right? I always I do some mom groups, and I tell the moms, when you're looking for childcare, you're looking for someone who's going to replace you. You're looking for the person who is going to be you for a big portion of the child's day. So it's probably the most important decision you're going to make in your life. And so, yeah, I mean, I love that it starts right from the first contact and then continues from there.
Well, and that's important to make sure that those things match. And I'm sure that when you're talking to parent groups, that is something you talk about, is those, what makes a Montessori program, what makes a play-based program, what makes a nature program, so that, again, and this comes back to Carrie's thing about curiosity and culture. What are the expectations those parents have for that child in their mind before they're school ready, right? So hopefully they're not expecting their 2 and 3-year-olds to be able to read and write, but it's worth knowing if that's some expectation they have so that we can help them get it grounded.
Yeah. I like to tell my educators, I say the first thing that you should ask parents is, what's the goal for your child this year? Like, what is it that you really want your child to learn or know? And it doesn't have to be academics. It could be something like, we want them potty trained, or we want them to eat independently, or, we want them to socialize, whatever the goal is, we should know as educators, because if we don't know, there could be a miscommunication. Like, they think something and we're doing something else. So let's try to incorporate what they want for their child, because they are the experts on their child.
Yeah, you may have them more hours in a day, but they will have them more hours in a lifetime. And even if that child is 6 months old, they had probably 2 months where they were 95% of the time the one with them. And so they still have more experience, and They also will recognize things that their child does because it's what their little brother did or what they did or what, stories they've heard about their, significant other as a child. So we have to be in partnership with the parents because they are an expert on their family. You're an expert on early childhood education and what is normal. And normal doesn't mean that it happens to everybody, but it means you've seen 100 3-year-olds. They've seen 5. So you have more information about what a 3-year-old should be doing. And so you can get them involved if there's a 3-year-old who is needing to really get into math because this kid is counting everything. So we need to move past one-on-one correspondence with this kid and get them into some early math concepts. So this is a kid who has an area where they're really gifted, or this is a child who is 3 years old and is not yet using any different tenses in their verbs. Everything is in the present tense. That's a kid who needs some support the other direction.
Mm-hmm. I think what you brought up, Carrie, I think is really, really important because, and we know that educators know this, but we also know that parents don't always realize this, right? As an educator, you've seen hundreds of kids that age. And so although I agree we need to ask the parents what they would like their child to be able to learn this year, I think it's really important for the educators with the support of the administrators to kind of understand, is that a realistic expectation? Just because they played the violin at 4 doesn't necessarily mean that that is a normal or appropriate expectation for all 4-year-olds, right? And so, we have to remember that sometimes we will have children and families in our program that might fall into a gifted spectrum, but that doesn't mean that every child in that family is going to fall into that spectrum, and that sometimes we watch too much television or we watch too many things online, and especially with AI now, right? Like you probably may or may, if you see a talking baby, that may or may not really be a talking baby. Like, people who have, 1-year-olds who have complete sentences. That could just be some AI voice, right? And so we have to remind the parents that the early educators are the experts, and that how it's important to give the educators the tools and the vocabulary so that they sound like professionals and they're confident enough to say, I think that is a really ambitious goal. So how about for the next 6 months, we look at making sure that they are appropriately potty trained versus we want them to be able to, run a half a mile or something
No, that's totally valid. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's totally valid. And so let's move into that discussion about educating parents, because I think that's part of an educator's job, right? Is to sometimes educate parents to say, you know what, this expectation is not realistic for this age, or maybe maybe the parent is lowering the expectation, thinking that the child still needs pureed food at 18 months. On both ends, right? Like we always need to educate parents. So let's talk a little bit about how do we have those conversations? How do we empower educators to have those conversations with parents? And especially if the conversation is difficult.
Oh, I love that. I think assessment tools are a great place to start. So I don't know, Susie, since we know that a fair amount of your educators are actually listening, I'm going to pose a question back to you. Ha, 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 yes. Ha, ha. What are the tools that your program uses to do child assessments? Is there a specific...
Yes, we do.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so twice a year we do what we call progress reports. Mm-hmm. But what it is really is looking at, we have a document called ELECT, Early Learning for Every Child Today. And it goes through what are the basic milestones that children would achieve by certain ages, right? And it has a big age range. And we look at those milestones and we look at, can a child tell us over, under, in, out, things like that. And so they know positioning or they know spatial awareness. And so we evaluate them based on all of those criteria. And then we have a meeting with parents to discuss that and say, okay, here's, the milestones. Here's where your child is at. Either we've seen it or we haven't seen it. We don't evaluate, by any other measure other than to say, we've seen this skill, or we've seen this behavior, or we haven't seen it. And that's how we, try to educate the parents into what are the expectations of this age and where is your child in relation to that.
Okay, so when there needs to be a referral, when there's a feeling that, okay, we've looked at this and now over 2 evaluations, there hasn't been a significant improvement and it's still significantly below what is expected, either one of those, and you're going to make a referral out because this person, you think this child might need some speech therapy or some kind of support. My favorite way of having the conversation is to say, we've seen this, we've talked to you about this. What we'd like to do is have someone come in and do an evaluation to rule out any problems. And that way the parents are like, aha, I think if they're defensive about it, they can be like, aha, I think you're wrong. We're going to have the expert come in and back me up that there's nothing wrong with my precious little baby child. And you have the ability to get a second pair of eyes that are more educated on that specific issue to come in and see what's going on with the child. So I like the phrase, I'd like someone to come in and do an evaluation to rule out any problems. Because if someone has a speech delay, there's about 15 different reasons that a child could have a speech delay. One of which is that the child is being exposed to 4 different languages. That gives you a speech delay. Another of which is repeated, ear infections, and they just need tubes. But it could be that they have an actual, cochlear loss or something like that. And it's not our job as educators to know the answer. It's our job as educators to notice that there's an issue and to encourage the parents to let us bring in an expert to do a further evaluation.
I love that. I think Carrie just brought up probably what is the most difficult conversation to ever have with a parent, which is something's not quite right. And hopefully, folks who are listening, make sure that you have those conversations and you know what is the standard operating procedures within your organization. Because sometimes it's not the educator who actually has the difficult conversation, but it's the educator who identifies the potential. And I think that having those assessments twice a year, perfect. But sometimes we know that if nobody's moved, even in 3 months, that maybe we need to have that intervention before waiting till the 6-month mark. And
yeah, I like for the first 18 months, I like to do it every 3 months, once a quarter. But that's my preference because I was an infant toddler educator. So I'm like, every quarter we need to see where the kids are. But that's a not necessarily industry standard. It's a Carrie is very concerned about infants and toddlers.
But I think it's important. I think all the way around, though, it's really important that having an evaluation tool. So regardless of what tool your program uses, having one makes it less opinionated and more standard. And I think that alone helps empower an educator to know, and again, not that they're going to sit there and track, I've done this for 10 years, which means I've got over 100 kids, but, pat yourself on the back. If you've been doing this for 10 years and you've got somewhere between 10 and 20 kids that you see every year, that means that somewhere between 100 and 200 kids you've interacted with and you know what the range looks like. You've probably had that gifted kid, but you've also probably had that kid who maybe wasn't so gifted.
So let's bring in the community. So let's talk about the broader community, how we can bring in, we've talked about how to involve parents and how to partner with parents. Let's talk about the broader community. How can we involve the community into our programs so that the learning happens beyond just the 4 walls of the classroom?
Oh, I love that. So, one basic and really easy way is having them come in as guests. So what I call an inbound field trip, right? So we aren't going to their place of business. They're coming to us. And so that's one of the easiest ways, and I know Carrie's probably got like 6 or 7 because I know I do, so I'm going to let Carrie talk so that I'm not talking for the next 5 minutes.
Well, I mean, it's again that curiosity. What are the kids interested in, and how can we either walk to something, or if we have a van or a bus, go somewhere or invite someone in. So if you've got kids who are very interested in dinosaurs and fossils, is there a creek bed that you can walk to where the kids can look for fossils in the creek bed? Because every creek bed will have some fossils. They may be 20-year-old fossils and not 10,000-year-old fossils or 100,000-year-old fossils, but there will be some fossils in there. And that's a way to go out into the community.
I also just want to say, anything you do with the community and kids, come back, take pictures, share it with your community. So making sure, because these are also great opportunities for marketing your program, making sure that anybody who is involved in the government also knows what your program is doing, as well as current families and future families. So if you've done a really cool experience where folks have come in or you've gone out, take those pictures, share as appropriate, and by standard operating procedures in your program.
Those are amazing ideas. I love those ideas, ladies. But we are running out of time, unfortunately. I think we could keep talking here. You guys bring a wealth of knowledge from early childhood education. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Some parting words, anything you'd like to say just to close off the podcast today?
Go out there, have fun, be curious, do things with as much of the community as you can. It's good for your mental health, and it's good for the kids' education.
Amazing. So first, before we end off, tell us how our listeners can find you.
At www.childcareconversations.com.
Amazing. And remember to check out Kate and Carrie's podcast. I'm sure it's a lot of fun, as it has been today. Thank you again for being here. Hello and welcome back. It was so fun to have Kate and Carrie on the podcast today. They were so fun to talk to. We tackled a really big topic, parent engagement and community engagement. So many great ideas to share with all of us. And I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to have both of them on the show today. I really recommend you check out their podcast called Childcare Conversations. It's an amazing podcast for early childhood administrators, supervisors, directors, daycare owners. So if you are in that category, please do check them out. They have amazing content. I think the biggest takeaway for me today was curiosity. How do we encourage engagement is to be curious about parents, to be curious about children, to really let that curiosity guide us into building those partnerships with parents and also involving our community. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today. Continue to be curious and build those partnerships and bring in the community to really enhance your program. Thanks for tuning in to the ECE Classroom with Susie Beghin. For more information, you can visit our website at www.susiebeghin.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast so you can stay up to date on our latest episodes. Thanks for listening.